Hey, and welcome back to another Learning Java 2D Game Programming video. So, in our last video, we made it so that we can save and load our maps, so that all of our hard work doesn't have to go to waste. Yay! Except, currently, all of our hard work has to go to waste. So, a few days ago, I was so young, I was so naive, I thought we could get away with using the serializable interface. But as it turns out, we really can't. So let me show you what I mean. If we hop into the game map class, let's just say we want to add something. And I'm just going to add a string name. So for some reason now, we want to name our maps. All right, fine and dandy, we're not doing anything. It's not really affecting anything else. Now we want to play again. Oh no, we couldn't load our map. Why? Well, we got the incompatible class because of the serial version UID problem. So this is calculated based on members of the class and I don't know, things like that. And we can get around this sorta by overriding this value. So we could define this variable inside of our class and give it a fixed number. That way, both of them would have the same version, and so this shouldn't be a problem. But then this will be null, of course, and we don't really have a way of, well, I guess we can override the write object or read object methods that the serializable interface or that the API uses in the background. We can override that and there give it default values or some other value, or I don't know. But really, if we have to do that for all of our classes just to be backwards compatible, what are we really gaining? So I'm feeling like not a whole lot. So we're probably gonna do this ourselves now instead. If you Google serializable, it mentions a lot that this isn't really supposed to be used for persistence, for saving things for long periods of time. It is rather supposed to be used for fast consuming APIs, such as networking. So if you know that both your client and your server are running the same version of your program and they have the exact same classes, then this could be very easy to just send back and forth. But it's not really meant to be used for saving and loading. So, bummer for us, we are writing our own save and load logic. So let's start doing that. I'm going to start by adding a package. I'm going to call it IO. For input and output, inside of here, I'm going to have an interface. I'm going to call this persistable. So our interface sure is going to support persisting. So what do we want our persistable objects to be able to do? Well, first of all, we want them to be able to give us a serialized string. So we call serialize and it gives us a string, which we have defined how that will look. And this string is going to contain all the data that we want to save and then load. So we also need a way to take a serialized string and give it to our object or make an object of it. And here is a problem with interfaces. We can't force classes to implement their own static method. Therefore, we're going to have to do it another way. It would have been nice to just, say tile.deserialize and then give it a string, and then it gave us a tile. But there's no way to do that generally than to add that method to all classes. So we're not doing that. Instead, we're going to assume that we have an instance of an object already. And on that instance, we're going to call apply serialized data. And it takes a string with the serialized data. All right, so these are the two methods that our persistable objects need to have. Now, inside of this interface, I'm going to define some delimiters that we're going to use to split into tokens so that we can read the serialized data. So I'm going to have just a regular delimiter, and I'm going to define that as a colon. I will have a section delimiter, which I am going to define as a line separator. And this is just how I'm going to do it. And let me talk about why. So for the computer's sake, this really doesn't matter. You could have chosen any character. Why I'm doing it this way is because I want our map to be human readable. I want you to be able to look at it and get a quick overview of what it looks like. And that's why I'm adding some line separators and things like that. If you were making a real game, you probably wouldn't want it to be human readable, and even you'd probably compress your files. For the sake of this series, I don't think we will. I want it to be human readable. I want us to be able to go in and make edits inside of the text and then see what that does to our game. So we're making it human readable. So we're adding some line separators. All right. So moving on, I'm going to make something called a list delimiter, and that I'm going to define as a comma and a space. So when we have a list, you can see an item with a comma and a space, and then the next item. And then I'm going to say column delimiter, and that's just going to be a line separator. All right, now anything that implements persistable can use these delimiters directly. I'm just going to close that off, and I'm actually going to start in the tile method, or the tile class, because it's smaller. So here, let's, instead of implementing serializable, let's implement persistable. And now we have to implement those methods. So starting with serialize, how do we serialize this object? Well, we need to build a string. So let's start by getting a string builder. And I'm just going to call it string builder. New string builder. And then we need to define how we want this to look. So I'm going to actually use as a convention for myself, I'm going to always start an object with the class name. So I'm going to say this get class, get simple name. Then I'm going to append the delimiter. And now what do we want to have inside of our tile? Well, we need to save the tile name. I'm going to start with that. Tile name. And then we need to append another delimiter so that we can tell when that value ended and another value starts. And then we're going to append the tile index. All right. So this is our tile serialized. That's all it is, but it's also because this is a very small class. It just has these two values, and these we will load it in like we did before. Based on the tile name, we'll fill this in after we have loaded the object. We won't be saving any of the image data since we already have it. All right, so let's just return that string builder to string. So how do we apply the serialized data? Now, let's say we have an empty tile and we are getting this serialized data, and we need to apply this data to our instance. Well, let's start by getting the tokens out. And we do that by getting the serialized data and calling split, not split. It fixed that for me, thank you. And we split it by the delimiter. All right, so now we have an array of tokens, which will be, this will be at 0, the class name, and then comes the delimiter, which we've split on. So number index 1 in our array will be the tile name, and index 2 will be the tile index. So knowing this, it's quite easy. Let's say set tile name, and apparently we didn't have a setter for that yet, so we'll have to make it. So we're going to set it to, well, actually, I guess we don't have to set it since we are inside of the class. We could just say tile name is equal to tokens 1. And in the same way, we can say that tile index is equal to And now we need to parse it because this is a string, right? So tokens 2. And that's really all it is. There you go. We have applied our serialized data. Now, the game map is going to be a bit more work. So let's just, first of all, implement persistable. I'm going to implement the methods. Let's serialize this. So let's start by bringing up the string builder again. There we go. And the first thing that we always want to append is the this.get class get simple name. So we always know which object are we looking at. All right, so now let's see, where do we want to go with this? Let's start by just appending the delimiter because we just had one value. So the next value is going to be the grid width, or the length of tiles, basically. So the width and then the delimiter, and then we're going to add the height. So which is tiles length. And then let's just duplicate this delimiter. I'm going to actually duplicate this and then say length for one of these. Delimiter. And then now is the array of tiles. So this is where we are going to do a little more work. Let's just start by giving it one of these section delimiters that we defined. So here is now the tile section. And let's make that double for loop that we usually have. All right, what do we want to do now? For every tile, let's do string builder dot append tiles x y serialize. So the tile can serialize itself. So we're just looping through them and asking every tile for its serialized version of itself. And between every tile in this array, let's also append the list delimiter. So when we read the map, it's going to be the tile and then comma space and then the next tile data. So it's going to be easy for us to read. And down here, I'm just going to do string builder dot append a column delimiter. Again, this will just give us a new line. And this is also for human readability. We could have just put all the tiles in one long line, and that would have not mattered to our program at all. But this is just so that we can read it better. So here we are currently done. So let's do string builder to string. Now the apply serialized data is going to be a little more work, but let's get to it. So first, let's get the tokens out. All right, and once we have the tokens, we can make a new tile array. So for the x, we have the integer dot parseInt tokens at index 1, right? Because at index 0, it says game map. And then do the same for the y index, parseInt tokens, but that's 2. So now we've created a new tiles array, 2D array. Let's get the tile information out. So first I'm just going to get the whole section into a string. I'm going to call it tile section, and that will be the serialized data split. I really want to write split, I don't know why. And this will be split in this by the section delimiter. And it's important that we get what's at number 1, because at number 0 is basically where this data is, so the game map data. now that we have the entire section with all of our tiles, let's start by getting all of the columns out. I'm going to do column delimiter. Now we have all of our columns. Let's do the double for loop. 0, as this is smaller than. And so at every x is one of our columns, right? So what we want to do here is get the row of this column. I'm just going to say row, or well, I guess this is the column, but let's just say the tiles in this column. So tiles, columns at position x, split, and I'm going to say list delimiter. All right, now for the y is then tiles at 0 length. And then let's just say y plus plus. What didn't I do correctly here? Hold on, I'm just gonna open this. Ah, there we go. Right, that's why we can't call this tiles. Let's just call this serialized tiles. There we go. So this is gonna be like so. All right, moving on. Now we need a no args constructor. So when we deserialize things, we can't really get around having a no args constructor. So I didn't really want one, because if you give it a no args constructor, then maybe you'd use it wrong. At some point, if you call this constructor and then you forget to populate the fields, it will give you, of course, null pointer exceptions and things like that. But when we are serializing and deserializing, this is usually what we need. And if you've ever worked with, I don't know, JSON serializers and things like that, they usually require no args constructors. So we're making one. So there we have it. We have a tile, an empty tile. So let's apply serialized data from the serialized tiles at index y. And then we also have to make sure that in our array at x and y will be this new tile. There we go. So this should be done for the application of the serialized data. So yay for us. I'm just gonna I'll cross it for now. We're probably gonna open it up. Let's start by moving the map IO into the IO package. And here we are going to be making a little bit of changes as well. So the first thing is we're not going to use an object output stream anymore. Instead of an object output stream, let's use a buffered writer. I'm going to rename it to a buffered writer, which will be a new buffered writer with a new file writer. Right. So now, instead of write object, we're just going to call write, and map, we're going to say serialize. All right, so that was the changes that was needed there. Load is going to be a little more. So instead of the object input stream, we're going to have a buffered reader. And I'm going to rename it to a buffered reader. It's going to be a new buffered reader using a file reader. Big shock, right? All right, so this is going to be different. All of this is going to be different, although we're still going to reload graphics the way that we did before. And here, I want an empty game map. So we're going to have to make a no args constructor here as well. So let's start by doing that. Game map. All right. And we're not using the class not found exception anymore. So now we have an empty game map, but before we read the entire file in one go, with a buffered reader, we can't do that. It can only read one line at a time. And since we wanted it to be human readable, we added a bunch of new lines. So therefore, we need to read every line and stitch it back into one string that we feed to our game map. So let's do that. Let's start by having a string builder that we will apply each line to. And then I'm just gonna keep this temporary, every line will be in here. Let's just call it line. And you'll see how. This looks a little weird, but it works quite well. So make a double parentheses and say that line is equal to buffered reader read line. And then if that isn't null, so this way we are actually assigning value to this variable inside of the while loop and then checking if that isn't null. So now we have value in the line. And first of all, let's append the system.line separator, because this buffered reader, it will now omit them. We added line separators, and it's important to our game map. They are looking for these line separators. So we need to add them back now that we are loading it. And then let's add the line. All right, and then once we have made this entire string, put it back together. Let's say map.apply serialized data string builder to string. And then, like before, we're loading the graphics and then we're returning the map. So this should be fine. Let's try it. And it immediately isn't, because we are loading right. So since the map that we have, that we are loading inside of our menu state here, I mean, this map was made using the old way. So the information inside of it doesn't work anymore, which means that just for now, let's just make a new game map so that we can start our game. Right, then let's open up the editor. Let's do some stuff, and I'm not going to do something super complicated. Let's press save. So the first thing is that nothing crashed when we saved. That's good. Let's check what that looks like in text. I'm going to this production my game and finding the map. As you can see here, unfortunately I never showed you the other file, but let me tell you that it was not human readable. So it was just a bunch of different characters. But this is definitely human readable, and we can change stuff in here if we want to. But now, does it load? Let's see. Load. Yay! So our map now loads again. We're basically back to where we were at the beginning of this video, but now we have much more control. And if for whatever reason we'd like to change stuff, so maybe I'd say that all the concrete should be dirt. Let's do replace all. Let's save it. Let's open it up. Editor, load. See, now everything is dirt. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could. So now we have a lot more control. And it's not gonna just crash if we start adding new things into our classes and stuff like that. So better prepared for the future. All right, next video, we are gonna get into auto tiling. So that's gonna be fun. So thank you for watching, and I will see you soon. Hej då!